My name is Kakuryu, Noel, and this is my second visit to Genjo-ji. I visited Genjo-ji for the first time for last summer's Summer Ango Sesshin, and there were definitely moments of feeling like being cooked. But I left here with a joyful mind. Roshi, Hojo-san, and Juwal, this container of Genjo-ji really has been in my heart since. And in this moment, being right here feels very exposed, transparent. And in this spirit of transparency, I'm so over my head and learning to swim. And perhaps being in this second to last day of Sesshin, maybe we're all meeting a sense of being exposed. Discomfort that comes and goes, resistance that comes and gets released, and maybe even those moments of ease and joy. And all of this is okay. So whatever it is that is arising for us right now, unfolding for us right now, we're getting this sense that we are this unfolding reality, which is completely fluid and unimpeded. And so we all take this posture and it all just unfolds as it does. And the reality of this moment may be like, sitting in the hot seat. But the truth is right now, on this second to last day of Sesshin, that we're all in the hot seat, right? And every day of our lives, we're in the hot seat, right? Right on the spot. And so a couple of months ago, Hojo-san invited me to serve as Shuso these last 2 weeks of Ango. And I've said this before, but I felt that the only answer was yes, right? During the opening ceremony, the first Shuso, Fugan, quoted Suzuki Roshi with, "When you say yes, you forget about yourself and are refreshed into some new self. Before the new self becomes the old self, you should say another yes. Yes and 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 yes, and it's endless." So I said yes to this invitation to take these steps in actively unraveling conditioned self. And I think I said this on the first night, but as soon as I said yes, then this other thought arose, which was, What have I just gotten myself into? Completely over my head. Or rather, jumping off the cliff of conditioned self. So conditioned self holds on to what is already known. The story of me. And conditioned self keeps us in these predictable patterns of turning away from reality. Turning away from difficulty, from pain, and so forth. Keeping our eyes closed, staying in the cocoon, or overstimulation, whatever the habit is. However, life has a way of pulling out the rug. You know, I mean, being in Sesshin pulls out the rug. When somebody dies, that pulls out the rug, right? A relationship ends, that pulls out the rug. I had this episode of AFib the other day, that pulled out the rug. And when that happens, we come face to face with this truth that though we try to hold it all together, we can't. It just falls apart, and it keeps falling apart. And all of our go-tos, all of our strategies that, you know, we've been trying to use all of our lives, they just don't work. And it keeps falling apart, and we keep falling apart, and life keeps falling apart. And not only does it keep falling apart, but there's no escape. And not being able to escape makes us very, very uncomfortable. At least until we start saying yes. Or as Roshi says, actively accepting. And by saying yes, we actively accept the reality of what's unfolding right now. The reality of this moment, whatever this moment is offering. And this practice, what we've been practicing in Sesshin and what we practice every day at home, supports our saying yes. Supports our actively accepting. Turning toward rather than turning away. And so today I said yes to sitting here with everyone and feeling exposed and awkward, and it's completely okay. Because right now I'm feeling that we're all in this as one body. So Hojo-san asked me to choose a theme for these 2 weeks of Ango. And I had some thoughts, and we went back and forth a little bit in email. And he suggested that I read the foreword to Dogen's Pure Standards for the Zen community. And he said, it's like, there's a lot in there. And there was, just in the foreword, just in the one sentence that I chose. And so the foreword was written by a contemporary master, Iko Narasaki Roshi. And I kept coming back to this one sentence. With everything you encounter, without separating self and others, become one with that thing, with your whole body and mind, dealing with it most thoroughly. And so I told Hojo-san that this sentence had really hooked my attention, and I kept going back to it, and I was excited about it. And in a reply, he said, "You've found your theme." And at first I thought it was too short. But the more I sat with it and the more I worked with it, I realized that it was fine. And so in preparation, you know, in a Zoom Doksan with Roshi, I asked, well, how do I prepare for this? And he said, well, you really can't. So I've been returning to this sentence regularly over the past couple of months, and trying to bring it into my daily experience. I wrote it on a piece of paper. I kept it in my pocket. Bring it out, you know, when I'm at work. You know. So back home, I live in the Boston area. I sit with a small Sambo Kyodan Sangha, and so that's the Soto lineage with an emphasis on zazen and forms, and but it also carries a tradition of koan introspection, and so I worked with this sentence much in the same way that I work with a koan, and so that's bringing it into life, right? So that it comes to life. And so coming back to the foreword of this book, the following sentence says, Dogen Zenji called this Jijuyu Zanmai, samadhi or concentration of self-fulfillment. The Jijuyu Zanmai is the criterion of the correctly transmitted Buddha way. And so Jijuyu Zanmai is the second part of Dogen's Bendowa, and an excerpt from that reads, in the authentic tradition of our teaching, it is said that this directly transmitted, straightforward Buddha Dharma is the unsurpassable of the unsurpassable. From the first time you meet a master, without engaging in incense offering, bowing, chanting Buddha's name, repentance, or reading scriptures, you should just wholeheartedly sit and thus drop away, body and mind. When even for a moment you express the Buddha's seal in the three actions by sitting upright in samadhi, the whole phenomenal world becomes the Buddha's seal and the entire sky turns into enlightenment. Because of this, all Buddha Tathagatas as the original source increase their Dharma bliss and renew their magnificence in the awakening of the way. And so the forward continues, the Shingi, pure standards, accurately show us how to carry out fully Jujuyu Zanmai throughout all the activities of monastic life, including zazen, kinhin, walking meditation, as well as washing the face, using the toilet, putting on robes, eating meals, doing prostrations, reciting sutras, sleeping, waking up, and so on. And an example that I found, which I really like, is for brushing your teeth. And so it says, next hold your toothstick, toothbrush, gasho, and say, holding the toothstick, I vow with all beings that our minds will attain the true Dharma and naturally be pure and clean. Of course, in our case, we're using a toothbrush, but the invitation is the same. We bow and thoroughly meet this activity. And we embody this simple activity of brushing our teeth, closing the gap between this I and the activity of brushing the teeth. I mean, how amazing is that? And then it goes on. Chewing the toothstick in the morning, brushing my teeth in the morning. I vow with all beings to care for the eye teeth that bite through all afflictions. Isn't that amazing? And so in the back of the book, the glossary definition of Jujuyu Zanmai also goes on to say, Dogen's teachings in the Pure Standards for the Zen community emphasize the satisfaction and fulfillment of Jujuyu Zanmai arising right in the midst of everyday activity. You know, all of it, including brushing your teeth. And this is also reflected when Roshi talks about it in No Beginning, No End. And I've read this already too, but I have a feeling I'm going to be going back to this over and over again. So Roshi says, in a Zen temple or monastery, collecting garbage is one of the most important jobs. When we pick up papers or garbage, we have to understand that we are also picking up the garbage inside our own minds. The words outside and inside are two ways of describing one thing. Since our thoughts and dualistic understanding are a kind of littering in our mind, when we pick one up, we pick both up in exactly the same way. Do you understand? That's our samu, which means work practice. And that's our work. When we pick up the garbage, we pick it up 100%. And I love this sentence. It's like when lightning strikes the sky, nothing remains. Can I read it again? It's like when lightning strikes the sky, nothing remains. This kind of action affects other people. If we pick it up in a distracted way with our minds on something else, we just make more litter. That's why we give to this task and to all of our activities 100% of ourselves. No matter how small the task may seem, picking up a speck of dust, or how big, we still give it 100%. As it says in the Sandokai, each thing has its own intrinsic value. It is with this very same spirit of realization that we approach our work and life. Practicing in this way, where we realize the self within the activity, because the self becomes the activity, is known in Japanese as Jijuyu Zanmai. When you pick up garbage, everything's being picked up. Therefore, when it's your responsibility to pick it up, garbage is the most important part of our practice. When we brush our teeth, brushing our teeth is the most important part of our practice. And it goes on and on and on. So after we sit zazen, the first thing we do is tend to the zafu and zabuton, fluffing the zafu, brushing off the zabuton, honoring this vajra seat, this place of realization. And so we bring zazen into that activity. Extending the unfolding experience of non-separation, right? Of the self becoming the activity that we've been nourishing as we've been sitting right into the next moment of life. which is tending to the Zafu and Zabuton. And then bringing it into standing. And bowing. And the first step of Kinhin, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. Into Oryoki, and so forth. And when we're at home, this may be extending the self, becoming the activity, into dressing for work, making breakfast, cleaning the kitchen, feeding the cat, cleaning the cat's litter box, commuting to and from work, so forth. And going back to the forward of the pure standards, the following paragraph then goes on to say, since all the activities within the 24 hours are practice of the Buddha way, embodying this Jijuyu Zanmai, that is the criterion of the Buddha way, is truly difficult. And it is the highest priority. So to live based on Shingi, the pure standards, is extremely important. And I'd like to add that it's difficult within this very container here, right? You know, even though everything is oriented to it, right? And it's very difficult in our daily lives, you know, back at home. But the invitation is exactly the same, which is to embody, to be the activity, and this is why we need to practice Zazen every day. And growing that practice. You know, speaking to those of us who are going home, right? Sitting in groups, whether that's online or in person, coming to zazenkais, coming to seshins, having study groups, having regular doksan, because those conversations can really show us where we go off, right? And can also ignite our daily practice, right? And also making practice commitments, like the practice commitments made, you know, for this Summer Ango, right? Where we might commit to sitting more each day, right? Each week or on weekends, right? And so we bring this practice training into life, wherever we are, so that practice training, so that Jijuyu Zanmai comes to life for us. It has to come to life for us. Roshi always says to me, you have to apply it in life. Right? And that's like this really important pith instruction. So in my life, back on the East Coast. I work as a medical assistant. A very unglamorous healthcare job. At a busy practice with a doctor who has a lot of patients with really complicated medical needs. You know, and they come in very anxious, sometimes angry, sometimes combative, sometimes uncooperative, sometimes really happy to see us. Most of the time they're really happy to see us. But it can be very challenging to show up while also remaining open and receptive, you know. In life, we often go into autopilot, right? Where we're there, but we're not there. But bringing my attention back, bringing my being back to this theme, and I'm going to say it again, with everything you encounter, without separating self and others, become one with that thing with your whole body and mind, dealing with it most thoroughly. I find that when I'm checking a patient's vital signs, going through their medication reconciliation, giving a flu shot, and so when I go back and I start work again, which will be on September 2nd, that's the beginning of flu season. So I'm going to be giving probably 25, 35 flu shots a day. But I'm finding that a gap closes. So, checking a patient's blood pressure can be a very intimate experience because it's done in silence. Applying the blood pressure cuff, then holding the patient's arm at heart level. Often when I press the stethoscope to the bend of the elbow, right? Because you're listening for the artery. Often I find I immediately hear the patient's pulse. Sometimes not. But I'm listening to their heartbeat for a moment. Within this silence of the exam room. And all there is this patient and their heartbeat. I can hear their breathing. And then I inflate the cuff. And when it reaches a certain tightness around the arm, then the sound of the heartbeat disappears. And then releasing the air from the blood pressure cuff, I listen for the sound of the pulse to reappear and then disappear again, paying attention to the numbers on the gauge. Where the sound appears gives the top number, and where it disappears gives the bottom number of a blood pressure reading. 180 over 110. No, 120 over 80. I've had some really high ones. And all of this just takes seconds, really. But during this short time, it seems like this gap between myself and the patient closes. Embodying the form of checking a blood pressure reveals this, right? Being with that. And there are many examples of this in our lives. If we apply this, thoroughly meeting the activity and really paying attention. And then leaving the exam room, I turn to the patient and I tell them that it was a pleasure to meet them. And it was. And so it's a very repetitive job. So I do this over and over and over and over again. And there's this opportunity to practice throughout the day. And I feel like from this place of non-separation, of closing the gap, right, that we serve each other. So I feel lucky that I'm able to practice this each day in my really humble job. So again, with everything you encounter, not separating self and other. Become one with that thing, with your entire body and mind, dealing with it most thoroughly. And what I'm also discovering is that this sentence expresses the essence of our entire practice, of the three refuges, of the precepts, of atonement, of course the forms. It's the practice of life. And so it seems to me that we deal with that thing, everything, by meeting these moments of reality as these moments unfold. Continually returning to this container, of this posture and breath. In Sesshin right now, it's posture and breath, posture and breath, posture and breath. All the forms. Each step, offering incense, pulling a weed. All these activities through each day. Experiences unfold, and we allow it. But what about pain? I don't want to turn toward pain. But the invitation is to turn toward pain. So I asked Hoja-san about pain, as I've been experiencing some hip pain, right, these last days. Well, first we clarify that the pain isn't going to kill me, right? And it isn't. But of course, if we need to change sitting positions or sit in a chair, of course we can do that, right? But the invitation here is to meet and be the pain. What? Meet and be the pain. Because as soon as we label it and start talking about it, we create separation, right? And then we're in this like conflicted struggle with pain, you know? Just sitting here on the zafu, I'm in this conflicted struggle with pain. So we squirm and we adjust, and it's endless. And we all do, and we do this to move away from, to turn away from. And it never stops. And so Hojo-san said that we do this all of our lives. And we both laughed because it's true. We do it all of our lives. We squirm and we adjust and we turn away. So being the pain in this container of posture and breath, what might that look like? Or what might that feel like? Straighten up. And I feel my seat in the zafu. And I feel the weight of my body in my seat. And I feel my knees and my legs on the zabuton. And breathe deeply into the tanden. And slowly letting the breath out. Awareness in my seat. Awareness in my knees. Awareness in my legs. Awareness in the soles of my feet. It's just this. It's just this. It's just this. And let this, the pain, the discomfort, whatever, just be there. And return, and return, and return, and return, and be still. And it's hard because it goes against all of our habit energy and conditioning. Because our conditioning says turn away, move away. And so it's like, as we say in the Oryoki chant, you know, it's like the lotus blooming in muddy water. And of course we get carried off, which is our habit. and recognizing that we got distracted, that's our cue. Just the recognition of being distracted is our cue to return to this posture and breath, returning, 100 million, billion times, which just means that there's no end to it. And returning 100 million, billion times, because that's what it takes, this jewel is revealed. That we're not separate from this unfolding reality. We're not this thing over here seeing reality over there. And reality includes everything. It includes the pain, it includes the toothbrush, it includes the blood pressure reading, it includes the AFib episode. All of us, friend, stranger, enemy, trees, ocean, sky. Everything. And we're not separate from this world and everything in it. And everything's included. And so, being thoroughly with the breath reveals non-separation with the breath, which is not separate from all of you, not separate from this world and everything in it. And being with the bow, we bow together. And we're not separate in this bow. And in this bow, we're not separate from everything. We're not separate in each step of kinhin. And with each step of kinhin, we're not separate from the floor beneath our feet and the walls and ceiling of the Zendo. In each step, not separate from each other and not separate from the world and everything in it. And again, we recognize for a moment, and then we forget, and we recognize, and we forget, and we recognize, and we forget. And sometimes it's really hard. And it takes a great deal of effort and a great deal of remembering. And through this effort, we grow to trust it. And it's necessary to bring this practice into daily life in order for this practice to come to life. And I'm learning and I'm humbled by this constantly. And so, a great Tibetan Lama, Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, he's one of Tulku Orjin Rinpoche's sons. And Roshi has shared some of Tulku Orjin's words in past talks. And so Mingyur Rinpoche came each year to teach us and give us empowerments in 3-year retreat. And he had the following words to offer after a long retreat of his And it's in line with what we've been talking about. And so he said, as a drop of water placed in the ocean becomes indistinct, boundless, unrecognizable, and yet still exists, so my mind merged with space. It was no longer a matter of me seeing trees as I had become trees. Me and trees were one. The trees were not an object of awareness. They manifested awareness. Stars were not the object of appreciation, but appreciation itself. No separate me loved the world. And so, in closing, I'm going to say it again. With everything you encounter, without separating self and others, become one with that thing, with your whole body and mind, dealing with it most thoroughly. And I'm going to keep trying. And so please, let's make this come alive by bringing it into daily life every day.